Welcome. I'm David Greenberg, and I'm the founder and managing director of the Freedom Studio. I'm also a world-renowned film and television star, and you may have recognized me in such classics as... Nah, I'm just kidding there. I'm not actually a movie star, at least not yet. On that note, if you know of a director or producer who's looking for great talent, I hope you'll put in a good word. In the meantime, let's dive into today's topic. This is a revised and updated version of a video that I published last year. In the original, I made several bold assertions about bills and public debts, assertions that may seem incredible to most people. Now, the principles and concepts I shared in that video are all true. However, I will admit that my understanding at the time was deficient. I hadn't yet unlocked the deeper level of truth hidden in this gem of a discovery. As a result, I probably made a few mistakes in that original presentation. Fortunately, I've learned a lot since then, and as a result, here we are. This new version significantly improves upon the original by addressing its shortcomings and presenting information in a whole new light. As such, I expect this version to be both more accurate and more valuable to the discerning viewer. When you are ready to receive the teaching, this will be a game changer. Oh, one important note here. In no way am I teaching or advocating for some kind of magic bullet or panacea that will allow you to get, quote, something for nothing. There is, in fact, no such thing. Anyone who claims to the contrary is, at best, a nuisance, and at worst, a direct threat to our freedom. As it turns out, the banking system has been carefully crafted to entrap those who take without giving, while leaving the real rewards to those of us who know better. Also, keep in mind that I'm not offering you any kind of legal advice or counsel at law. What you choose to do with this knowledge and how you use it is entirely up to you. My wish and desire, however, is this. Please use this knowledge for the good of mankind and the world we share. In that spirit, let's dive in. Part 1. Paying the bills. For most people, paying bills is, at the very least, unpleasant. And for many, it's downright stressful, worrisome, or anxiety-provoking. I mean, do you know anyone who actually looks forward to getting a bill in the mail? If you're watching this, you may actually be living paycheck to paycheck, perhaps just keeping your head above water. Or you may have found yourself working harder or doing work you dislike just to pay the bills. I want you to be honest with yourself. Does it feel like you have to work just to survive? And if so, does it really have to be this way? I mean, is this really the best that we can do? Or is there a deeper level to this game we call life? Well, I'll let you be the judge of that. For now, I want to share with you what I've learned. So let's start with an important question. What exactly is a bill? Also known as a statement, a billing statement, a billing notice, or frankly, a whole bunch of other things we're going to see in a moment. In context to all of this, bill is shorthand for bill of exchange. A bill of exchange is a type of negotiable instrument. Basically, it is a written order by one party, we can call them the drawer, to another party, the drawee, to pay a certain amount of money to a third party, the payee. All right, you say, nothing earth-shattering here so far. True, but let's keep going. A bill is also a presentment. More accurately, the act of issuing a bill is the presentment. Okay, so what the heck is a presentment? A presentment, my friend, is the act of issuing a bill or other instrument in demand of payment. In other words, when you receive a presentment, the sender is asserting that you owe money. That seems reasonable, you say. If I contracted, for example, to pay back a loan, isn't it reasonable that I should have to repay it? Well, yes, and just not in the way that perhaps you thought it would. Let me explain. Most presentments aren't addressed to you at all. They are, in fact, addressed to a corporate legal entity called a person. This person may also be referred to as the straw man, the ens legis, the debtor, and some other names as well. That's also why, in most cases, the name appearing on the bill is written in all capital letters. This is not an accident. It's not because the bank or corporate computer system can't write your name in mixed case. It's not a function of lazy programming. And it's definitely not to make the name more readable. Use of all capital letters is a universally accepted writing style that denotes the name of a corporation or a corporate legal entity. So, for example, let's say we have a man whose name is Brian David Phillips. The person associated with Brian will be named Brian David Phillips in all capital letters, or perhaps Brian D. Phillips, all capital letters, or some other variation. Note that when you speak the name aloud, you can't really tell which case is being used. And this will become very important in context, so stay tuned. So, you ask, how was this person created and why? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's answer these two very important questions. Part 2. The magician's sleight of hand. The answer to the how question is as follows. Shortly after you were born, your mother, acting as an informant, ratted you out to Big Daddy Government. Wasn't that kind of her? She did so by signing a birth certificate, or perhaps a certificate of live birth. In fact, if you're able to obtain the original certificate of live birth, you will see the word informant next to your mother's name. Now, don't go hating on Mom for this. Chances are very good that she was duped into agreeing to this contract under false pretenses. Nonetheless, Mom's acting as informant kicked off a chain of events that would lead to your self-induced enslavement to an absolutely ingenious system of total behavioral control. Through this paperwork, the person was birthed with your name, in all capital letters, of course. And additional paperwork was filed with the appropriate governmental agencies behind the scenes. Around the same time, a new account was established with the Treasury and designated a Social Security number. In effect, a corporate franchise, a state-created legal entity, the person, was now authorized to act in commerce. By the way, for those of you who may not have been born or naturalized in one of the 50 states of the United States, don't fret. This all applies to you as well, just with some nuanced changes. Now, the person, being a legal fiction that exists on paper only, is subject to all kinds of taxation, fines, lawsuits, evictions, arrest warrants, and civil or criminal charges. In fact, you've probably heard the famous statement that, quote, all crime is commercial. Well, now you know. As you grew up, you were slowly conditioned and programmed to believe and act as though you are the person, and the person is you. Pretty darn ingenious, eh? Every time the person assumes a new debt or liability, guess who is expected to pay? That's right, you are. because you are, in essence, acting as the surety for the person, meaning the one who has to pay for everything. Are you with me so far? Part 3. Capturing your infinite worth. Here's something they'll never teach you in public school. You are, in fact, a being of infinite value and worth. And that's true no matter how shitty your life circumstances have become. In commerce, your value is a function of what you can create, either through your own labor or by organizing the efforts of others, or perhaps both. Knowing that this is true, the engineers of banking and government found a way to capture your value by securitizing the birth certificate. When it comes to public commerce, you, my friend, are the creditor. It is your inherent value that is captured in the commercial realm. And it is your value that discharges any debt or obligation assumed by the person, who is in effect a shadow version of you. And now we get to discover something really interesting. Part 4. There is no money. Now, if you've been paying attention, you notice that I recently wrapped 2 keywords in quotation marks: pay and money. That was a bit of foreshadowing on my part. You see, in the public, there is no money, and payment isn't what you think it is. Bold claim, you say? Let's take a closer look. Oh, and as we do so, keep this in mind. Number 1, when you receive a bill, it's addressed to the person and not to you. Number 2, a presentment is a demand that the person pay a debt. So in short, the person, your fictional twin, owes a debt in which you are supposed to pay a certain sum of money. So what exactly is money? Well, I'll give you a hint. The US dollars, or other bills that you may have in your wallet, and the funds in your bank account, they aren't money. Nope. Money is a fungible unit of stored value that is an agreed upon medium of exchange. For example, gold and silver coins are money. In fact, gold and silver coins are the only money lawfully recognized by the United States Constitution. Hence, they are also called lawful money. This is in contrast to the legal tender that most people are used to using. Legal tender is not lawful money. Legal tender, as we shall see, is evidence of a debt. You cannot pay a debt with another debt, just as you cannot douse a fire with more fire. The only way to repay a debt, which is a sum of money owed, is with lawful money. But there's a small problem. You see, in 1933, the bankers did a thing. What did those naughty bankers do exactly? In collaboration with their corporate government allies, they brought their big plan to fruition and confiscated all the gold and silver and outlawed the use of lawful money to repay debts. Don't believe me? Go research House Joint Resolution 192 and Public Law 7310 in the historical record. Now, this act of piracy on the part of the bankers presented 2 problems. First, if lawful money was confiscated and outlawed, what could be used instead to pay a debt? And if there is no money, how can a debt be repaid? Part 5. I owe you and I owe you. In an incredible sleight of hand, the whole concept of money was inverted. Instead of being a store of value, money was now a security, an instrument of debt. Lawful money was replaced with something called negotiable instruments. Negotiable instruments, such as bills of exchange or promissory notes, aren't money. They are evidence that money is owed. In other words, they are debt notes. You can think of them as a type of IOU. The Federal Reserve notes, what we typically call US dollars, are negotiable instruments. They are signed notes evidencing that the US government is indebted to the private Federal Reserve Bank for a sum of money that is the face value of the note. If you live somewhere else and use a different currency, the same applies so long as the currency is not either itself a store of value or backed by gold or other value. And just to give you a hint, that will be true for practically all world currencies. So in effect, we are now conducting commerce by trading and exchanging debt notes as currency. However, the FRNs or other fiat currency in your wallet aren't the only negotiable instruments being traded in commerce. Check this out. Part 6. I promise to pay. As it turns out, whenever you sign an instrument where the person promises to pay or orders to pay a certain amount of money, your signature charges that instrument with commercial value. That is why, in a recent video, I stated that your reputation is the currency. The bankers are betting on your productivity and value as a man or woman. And the Federal Reserve Bank has made it possible for other banks and corporations to benefit from that commercial value as though they had been paid money. For example, the promissory note signed as part of a loan agreement is worth at least the full maturity face value when exchanged for FRNs. So, when you sign a negotiable instrument, your signature infuses the instrument with commercial value that can be monetized. And in essence, you can now pay a debt with your signature. This is not only legal, it is the only way to pay a public debt or obligation in a moneyless system. As a result, all of the laws were rewritten to allow for payment through performance instead of with lawful money. Is your head spinning yet? Part 7. You can't mix public and private. Now, I need to clarify something here. I've made reference a few times to public in context to all of this. And so it's very important to master the difference between public and private. In fact, most people go through life and completely miss one important fact. There is a public legal jurisdiction and a private one, and you cannot mix the two. The public realm is the statutory, quote, at law world of corporations. In fact, the word corporation, corp plus oration, is the clue. We are literally breathing life into these dead entities. Taxes, debts, civil and criminal charges, arrest warrants, all of these are moves in the public. It's a big elaborate game that most people don't realize they're playing. In context to this, if you come to a private agreement with another man or woman and as a result are indebted to them, you cannot use this process to discharge the debt. So please don't try to do that. What I'm explaining here only applies to the public. You, in your private capacity as a man or woman, can interact with the public through the person, which is a kind of, quote, transmitting utility between the two realms. Part 8. The spiritual game. Now that we've taken a deep dive into the mechanics of how this all works, let's discuss the most important question. Why has this been done? I also want to point out that this is the only part of this presentation that is wholly my opinion and perhaps conjecture rather than based on historical facts and truth. So please take it with a grain of salt and feel free to draw your own conclusions. In terms of what is happening, and in context to natural law, I see this as an elaborate spiritual game. In brief, this is a kind of, quote, shit test for humanity. And perhaps for you personally, you can think of it as creation asking you a very important question. How badly do you want freedom? I think this sums up pretty concisely what has transpired and why things are as they are. Beyond that, it would be pure speculation on my part to attribute a particular motive or desire to any of the engineers of the system. From an occult sciences perspective, you already have all of the answers within you. It's therefore up to you to activate your own will force and ignite your own personal template in context to everything I'm sharing with you. If you truly desire freedom, and when you're ready, the remedy will reveal itself to you. When this happens, I and our organization, the Freedom Studio, will be there to help you see it through. And now, let's address the specifics of how to put this all into practice. Part 9. Accept and return for discharge. First of all, please do not try to do this with private debts or obligations. I can't tell you how many times people have offered to pay me or our organization with a bill of exchange. While I'd love to honor the instrument, I have no way of exchanging it for FRNs, and therefore for me it's about as valuable as a blank piece of paper. However, when it comes to public debts, it's game on. This is the area I needed to revisit after recognizing the gap in my initial video on the topic. You see, when it comes to putting this all into practice, it's not necessarily as easy as one might think. That's because the remedy, the ability to pay for public debts with a signature, has been very well hidden. For obvious reasons, the bankers have not made it easy to put this into practice. Note that difficult does not mean impossible. Over the years, a very small number of people have been able to implement this successfully. Going back to public versus private, let me make something clear. When you discharge a public obligation, you are acting from the private upon the public. This means all discharge is a private process. It's not meant to be public, and that's also why I'm not going to teach you how to do it on this very public video. However, I am going to explain, for those who are ready, how you go about learning this process. So let's recap here and sum up what we know. Number 1, there is no money. All public commerce is conducted through the exchange of debt instruments as currency. Number 2, public obligations may be paid through performance, which is acceptance, indicated by a signature. Number 3, all taxes, fees, fines, commercial loans, mortgages, court charges, arrest warrants, evictions, etc., are all presentments to the person, evidencing a public debt or obligation. Number 4, as the surety and acting from the private, you, quote, pay these debts by accepting them and returning them back to the issuer. In fact, it is in the public interest that you learn how to properly pay your bills this way in order to satisfy the public debt and balance the books. Spiritually speaking, this is analogous to stepping into your sovereign standing and taking full responsibility for your affairs. However, since most people do not act accordingly, you can expect resistance and pushback from the corporations, at least in the beginning. And as such, you'll need to learn both how to perfect your private process and how to enforce it. So let's talk about how to do that. Part 10. How to pay the bills correctly. Researching these topics, I've come across a lot of different ways to pay the bills through acceptance. It would also seem that most of these approaches have worked at least once. In terms of a streamlined process that is uniform and simple, I think it boils down to two options. The first is to learn how to perform a, quote, banker's acceptance using a notice in equity and a very specific process that invokes the equity legal jurisdiction. The second is to learn how to tender negotiable instruments backed by the value of the bond created as part of the secured party/creditor process. Neither of these approaches is mutually exclusive, and so one could learn to use both of them, each per its use case. Bringing equity to an account fully closes the account, and so equity won't work well for things like utility bills or credit card payments. On the other hand, equity works very well with federal taxes and unsecured loans. It will take time to master and implement these approaches, and it's not something you're going to learn in a day or even in a week. That's why the path to freedom always starts with an important question. Again, going back to what I've already asked you in context, how badly do you desire freedom? How committed are you to this path? In our private education organization, we've created a private space where you can learn the above-mentioned processes in detail and much more. Our private academy is all about self-actualization and activation of sovereignty through practice and not just theory. If you vibe with my approach and how I presented things today, you may want to jump in and join one of our private memberships. From there, my colleagues and I will be able to guide you to the next steps to mastering debt discharge and all of the great processes available to you. We hope to see you there. To get started, just visit thefreedom.studio. Thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.